política pública para el pueblo y no en contra del pueblo, ¿no?
This is a collapse of major proportions, and I think it's important for us to clarify who were responsible for this. So there is a lot of misery, there is a lot of austerity, and I think the people of Puerto Rico deserve to know how did we get to this point.
I think that at this point people are really anxious because the budget has so many cuts in so many areas. If you keep squeezing the middle class in Puerto Rico and there's no strategy for creating jobs, then people will continue to leave the island. Time is not in our favor. We have to solve this as quickly as possible. Things are not going to get better in Puerto Rico as time passes. We have to face this crisis as soon as possible.
Hello and Assalamualaikum. I am Nasuha Binti. Today I would like to tell you guys about the story of Puerto Rico crisis that is happening here today. Let me tell you a bit about the history of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico began as a settlement of the archipelago of Puerto Rico by authority colonial between 3000 and 3000 BC. Other tribes, such as Senegal and Arawakan, Puerto Ricans, populated the island between 466 and 908. At the time of Christopher Columbus' arrival in the New World in 1492, the dominant indigenous culture was that of Taínos. Latino peoples' numbers were dangerously low in the latter half of the 16th century, much of the population increased by Europeans, despite being as well as Located in the northwest Mediterranean, Puerto Rico formed key part of the Spanish Empire, which was Throughout most of the 19th century until the conclusion of the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico and Cuba were the last two Spanish colonies in the New World. They served as Spain's final outpost in a strategy to regain control of the American continent. Realizing that it was in danger of losing its two remaining Caribbean territories, the Spanish crown revived the Royal Decree of Graces of 1815. The decree was printed in Spanish, English and also in French in order to attract Europeans with the hope that the independence movement would lose their popularity and strength with the arrival of new settlers. free land was offered to those who wanted to populate the island on the condition that they swear their loyalty to the Spanish crown and allegiance to the Roman Catholic Church. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico was invaded and subsequently became a possession of the United States. The first years of the 20th century were marked by the struggle to obtain greater democratic rights from the United States. First, let me talk about the Puerto Rico itself and how did this issue happen. It is from the mistake of Puerto Rico itself, or it is the mistake from others that we don't see. Let's know it a little deeper. As the background of Puerto Rico, at the end of the Spanish-American War in 1898, Puerto Rico was ceded to the United States. The United States then refused to pay the colony's creditors, asserting they held odious debt. Before 1898, the people of Puerto Rico had Spanish citizenship. After Puerto Rico stopped being part of Spain, the people of Puerto Rico had neither independent nor colonial citizenship. The insular cases, a series of Supreme Court decisions issued in the early 19th, defined Puerto Rico as an unincorporated territory appertaining and belonging to the United States, but not a part of the United States within the revenue clauses of the Constitution. The Jones-Shepard Act is one of these laws of Supreme Court which exempts interest payments from bonds issued by the government of Puerto Rico and its subdivision from federal, state, and local income taxes, so-called triple tax exemption regardless of where the bondholder resided. This right made Puerto Rico bonds attractive to municipal bond investors. This factor led Puerto Rico to issue bonds that were always attractive to municipal investors regardless of Puerto Rico's account balances. Puerto Rico thus began to issue debt to fund its expenses, a practice repeated for 4 decades since 1973. This island also began to issue debt to repay all the debt, as well as refinancing all the debt possessing low interest rates with debt possessing higher interest rates. Between 1996 and 2006, Congress eliminated the tax credits, contributing to the loss of 80,000 jobs on the island and causing its population to shrink and its economy to contract in all but 1 year since the Great Recession. Then in 2015, with 73 billion in debt, Puerto Rico defaulted for the first time in its history on August 3. The island's economy was in downward spiral for some time, yet existing laws exclude the U.S. territory's public entities from federal bankruptcy laws. Puerto Rico's governor, Alejandro Garcia Padilla, appealed to Washington to make changes to the laws to rescue the island finance in June. Yet, Congress was not able to respond in time to a crisis that was largely its fault. First, if you look at the background and the introduction, I tell you in the first link in the video, we can already tell that the United States federal government that is making Puerto Rico having the crisis debt that they built from the first place until become uncontrollable in the year of 2015. There are so many more causes that lead to this debt crisis. For example, first, mismanagement of the government itself. The tax policy, also known as corporate tax breaks, that granted by the United States government, the disparity in federal social funding, and also the triple tax exemption.
Why is Puerto Rico in so much debt? Well, it's suffered economically since 2006 when the United States government eliminated corporate incentives for American companies who dominate the local economy. A tax loophole, however, allowed Puerto Rico to continue to borrow money, and its debt ballooned to $72 billion. As a U.S. territory, Puerto Rico lacks the voting power in Congress, so it can't decide on laws that concern it, like the Merchant Marine Act, which stipulates taxes, customs, and import fees on all foreign imports to the island. This law makes the cost of living infinitely higher than the rest of the United States and forces thousands of Puerto Ricans to leave the island for the mainland. So is Puerto Rico's political status pulling it further into debt?
Each municipality elected legislature, usually including 1,000 to 1,500 members, receive per diems and expense money. Just like the central government, municipalities will issue debt through the Puerto Rico Municipal Financing Agency to stabilize their finances rather than make adjustments. In total, the combined debt carried by the municipalities of Puerto Rico accounts for 3.8 billion or about 5.5% of Puerto Rico outstanding debt. This shows that how the government is misbehaving so much that lastly threatened the country. Based on the first cause, you already know that the country is more unstable than you really know. To add more, the United States government also granted a tax break to incentive U.S. corporations to invest more on Puerto Rico. Businesses in Puerto Rico have to use the U.S. Merchant Marine to import any merchandise or products. This makes shipping more expensive to the point that the cost of transportation in Puerto Rico is twice that the Caribbean nation, which greatly impacts Puerto Rico's ability to trade with neighboring nations. The subsidiaries operating in the island to send their earnings to the parent corporation at any time without paying federal tax on corporate income. The economy of the island was significantly reliant on the additional investment and spending generated by companies taking advantage of that provision and has been unable to replace the benefit after its loss. According to the New Yorker, at one point, more than half of the drugs sold in the United States were manufactured in Puerto Rico, but they gain nothing in the trading import of the drugs, and it makes the country known as the poor country. So now, what will happen to Puerto Rico? Let's look at the graph. The graph, taken from a news report commissioned by the island governments and issued on Monday, shows that Puerto Rico has been doing worse than the rest of the country for the past 15 years. The economy began to contract in 2007, a couple of years before the economic collapse on the mainland. It's no surprise that people have been leaving Puerto Rico if they can. the population is declining at an alarming rate of 1% per year. Not coincidentally, 2006 also marked the beginning of a deep recession for Puerto Rico, which has lasted until today. Puerto Rico's high corporate taxes on domestic corporations, along with low taxes on US subsidiaries, has skewed the Puerto Rican economy toward foreign investment from the United States. When Section 936 repealed in 2006, foreign investment began to flee. Without a strong domestic corporate presence to fill the void, the economy began to contract along with the tax revenues. Since then, Puerto Rico's economy has shrunk nearly every year, with unemployment at 12% and fewer than half of civilians in the labor force. Economists from the Federal Reserve and the private financial sector have pointed to the repeal of Section 936 as a major cause of Puerto Rico's current recession. Given its desperate need for cash, the government has gotten into some bad habits. Krieger and her colleagues write like negotiating with citizens who evade taxes to get them to pay and granting businesses fed subsidiaries to locate on the island. The result is that fewer taxpayers and investors seriously believe the government will make them pay all of they owe. In the middle of each year, government agencies are ordered to make do with less, but they rarely comply. Instead, they carry on with business as usual and the government is forced to borrow more than nothing. They are now with their current governor, Garcia Padilla, competing demands for budget cuts, and the Puerto Rican Constitution have obligates the government to be paid before pensioners and public workers if the government went broke. And it gives more burden to the governor about how to make sure the problem has its solution and been clear as soon as possible. Governor Padilla also attempted to pass a Recovery Act to enable the Commonwealth to overhaul the debts and labor contracts of the island's public corporation, which was struck down by the United States District Court in Puerto Rico. Deeming it unconstitutional, the act was aimed at granting local municipalities the right to enter bankruptcy in order to deal with the debt bill. Since the Commonwealth itself cannot declare bankruptcy, the government has hoped to allow at least some of the state-run corporations that provide electricity, water and streets and sanitation services to declare bankruptcy to seek some temporary relief from the debt burden. And lastly, there is only bad things happen to Puerto Rico, and it is the fact that the Commonwealth is unable to bear the load of 73 billion in outstanding debt and went into default for the first time in its history in August 2015. Although Puerto Ricans were granted citizenship in 1917, they only gain half of citizenship rights. That is, they are able to be conscripted but aren't given the right to vote in the United States Congress. Economically, Puerto Rico has been getting the shorter end of the stick as well. Forced to use a currency that is much higher than that of its neighboring nations, and not allowed to import or export directly with foreign ports, an economic system not suited with the island economic condition was imposed on the Commonwealth. In a country founded upon the principles of freedom and equality, one presumes just principles can be found within the structure of the United States. However, the United States treatment of Puerto Rico has been anything but fair since it's become its territory. Hour wages. It is for the minimum wages for Puerto Rico. The minimum wage is increasing by the government. The employment is reduced, but if the states of Puerto Rico had their practical time, they cannot afford to hire as many employees. They want because the economy at that time is really weak. From this issue, they do not have enough funding and they is lagging behind more in the Caribbean. Puerto Rico has and violate itself, but we can't afford to be an attraction to the tourists because if they are open to the tourist industry, they have to bear the high cost of electricity and lack of maintenance, personnel, and it will give more burden to the country. What else can you say about this issue? It is a fact that debt crisis that is happened to Puerto Rico is such a serious problem and the United States federal government doesn't give enough justice for this kind of country. The status that been held by the Puerto Rico hasn't been changed in a century and this is also a big problem to Puerto Rico. The tax breaks that been introduced to Puerto Rico have been giving a positive impact to US government, but Puerto Rico itself has been in a mess because of the tax breaks for its only financial point is the import. Although much of the trouble is due to an irresponsible government that was incompetent in managing its own finances, Congress' role in creating this financial mess cannot be denied. And considering this is a territory that has been with the US for over a century, the unfairness of the situation can hardly be denied. If the US is not willing to grant the Commonwealth independence, then it is long overdue that Puerto Rico be fully integrated within the United States. this is all from me to a summary of Puerto Rico debt crisis in 2015. Hope you enjoy it.